Hello, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to another episode of my series Nukkar Dialogues. And today I have a very special guest, a dear friend, achiever, inspiration to all of us who love history, Arsh Ali, India's youngest archaeologist, Egyptologist. Hi, Arsh. Welcome to the show. It is so good to have you.
Thank you so much, Ishan, my dear friend. It's really great always to have a discussion with you on FB. And I hope that all of the listeners as well as you are going good in the lockdown.
So in this conversation, we are going to talk about, very briefly on many topics because discussing about young India is the topic that we all, very much like to discuss, and it will take us hours to complete the topic. To discuss very briefly on topics like politics, innovation, creativity, education system, as well as politics of India. So starting with the first topic, Arsh, how is your lockdown going?
It's wonderful. The lockdown actually is very dreadful because we see that there is a huge spike in the number of corona cases that is rising in the country. So, but the lockdown, as far as I can say, is going wonderful. You get a lot of time doing things which you wanted to, but you don't have the time previously. So now I'm going a little bit further into those things, like I'm doing an experimental study of the ancient Indian mummification, as we had a session on that. That how the Ramayana and several medical texts have told us something about the mummification that used to take place before the cremation in ancient
Yeah.
India.
Yeah.
So now doing an experimental study on my fish, who has died some days ago in the aquarium naturally. Apart from that, lot of translation is going on of other ancient texts because at some of the places the translations have not been so much accurate and precise as it should be. So now mugging up a lot in that work, and as well as talking with super minds like you has always been a part of the lockdown ever since its imposition. So I'm really great in that. And also pondering over and thinking about the problems that the world at large and we as youth are facing these days. And as one of the Sanskrit sukts say, it says, Udyamene hi siddhyanti karyani na manorathe, which means that it's better to perform the action because action only gives us the fruit rather than just pondering over and thinking over it. So, as soon as the lockdown goes over, I will try to perform the actions on the hypothetical thinkings or the thoughts that I'm making up these days and following the wonderful philosophy of the Bhagavad Gita and the wonderful philosophies of other cultures, which teaches us to rely on action as a course and as an instrument for achieving your goals of maintaining righteousness. I plan to do the following things.
Yeah, by the end of this year, India will be the youngest nation. And Dr. Kalam had a dream, which he documented in the late 90s that was for the government of India called India 2020. So, with time, with the, the crooked system, if you say, we all have forgot about, we do not remember the vision of India that he weaved for us, as you can say, and he gifted that to India. He gifted us all an aspiration that yes, we can be an economically developed nation in the future. And today's set out the youth, the importance history plays in shaping our future. So the second question naturally should be that what is the importance of history? Why should the youth engage them?
Ishan, I would like to go it very simply. And I think that you were the only one who gave me that feeling of thinking about this particular thing. That is, we don't know anything about the future, nor do we know everything about the present that is going on. Because the present is always suspicious. It is suspicious, it is prone to questions of what is happening, how is happening, and when it is happening, things like that. It is only the past that remains for us complete. And as you have told me some days ago, I would just like to enumerate on the same point. The past is complete with us. And it is only through the past we can understand how we can make our presence better. And making our present better would make, the future of India and the world automatically in a more wonderful way. It is very cool, actually. It is a very cool idea of thinking every idea on very liberal grounds. You need to be very much impartial to all the different thoughts and streams of learning, all the different ideologies that are present in the world. You need to respect each and every one of them and take out the best of all. That I think is very important, which these days we are not able to understand, as especially talking about the youth of today, of so to speak, the millennials that we have. I think that creativity, it comes from learning, and learning comes with patience. So, patience is the first step for learning, because unless and until you enter the library and you're not patient enough to search for the books or the reference you want to learn about, how can you gain knowledge and then the creativity that comes with knowledge? And creativity, of course, if the youth of today is creative enough, it thinks as an entrepreneur. Because in my view, an entrepreneur is someone who has a problem to solve. He
Hmm.
has something of a ready-made solution to a problem, and in the cases when there is no solution available, he can deduce one. And that is always possible with creativity. You need to be creative of forming new equations, new solutions to the problems that the world is facing, our society is facing. That I think is very much lacking with the youth today. We are turning out to be robots rather than the thinking machines, as one could say. We don't need to mimicry. You see nowadays lot of people switching over to mobiles lot number of times. Most of their time is spent in searching and googling in mobiles or in laptops or in computers. Actually, that causes a lot of medical complications. The waves that come out from the screens, the blue waves that come, that is a part of the spectra, it causes damage to the eyes, and in turn the nerve, the visual nerve that connects the eye to the brain, it also damages it. You're not able to think, you're not able to judge balanced in a balanced way between right and wrong. You actually tend to despair yourself, your abilities, and what you should do and what you shouldn't. That difference, I think, it fuses with these changes that is happening in our youth. And I think that history as a subject is very important to make sure that whatever mistakes we have committed in the past as human beings shouldn't be committed in the future. That was the idea on which the United Nations was formed. That was the idea on which the League of Nations was formed after World War One. That is the idea that we should be based upon for making sure that our future, both of our country as well as of the world, doesn't get despaired by forces that are coming from within. That is very much destructible, I think, to the psychological, the social, as well as the intellectual framework, the skeleton that we have in our society. That I think history has a role to play in repairing that damage that happens. We learn from the past and we look towards the future.
That is why many youngsters, like, like we are also doing something on our level best to, to promote history among students. This is the basic idea, that they must be aware of the wrongdoings or what good things were there in the past, from where we can take inspiration or we can learn something that, we shouldn't do it in future. So you mentioned creativity. Okay, do you think our education system lacks that right now? We are just making machines.
You
If we
know,
talk about the history classes, they are being taught in a classroom. How can you teach history in a classroom? It is all about exploring, visiting archives, visiting museums, visiting heritage sites. That should be a part of education system, I just think.
it's very correct. It seems that you're talking on the words of the same way by which Sir Rabindranath Tagore spoke about at the time of when India was getting independent. Rabindranath Tagore was a very great thinker. He's credited with composing the national anthem of India, the national anthem of Bangladesh, that is Amar Sonar Bangla, and also he
Sri Lanka,
was
I think.
behind the national anthem of Sri Lanka, that is Sri Lanka Mata. He was a great writer, he was a poet, he was a painter, he was a writer, and he was also a visionary. And he was very much with the ashram system of education that was centered around the concept of a guru shishya tradition. If I quote from a very common quoted verse from the Sanskrit text, that is Gurur Brahma, Gurur Vishnu, Gurur Devo Maheshwara, Gurur Sakshat Par Brahma, Tasmai Shri Guruve Namah. So actually, the very concept of a teacher or a guru is very important in the ancient Indian tradition. And I think that it has implications even today. Now, being a student of over 20 languages, more than that of the subjects, I've actually realized the importance of a guru. Because at times, like in Egyptian hieroglyphs, when I was studying it myself, it took me almost 9 years. That is from the class, I think class 7, 8, I completed it. And I started studying it from nursery. Now, normally
Yeah.
take that much time because if you go for any professional studies like an undergrad in any foreign university for learning hieroglyphs, that is the ancient Egyptian language, it merely takes you 3 years or 4 years because you have teachers there, you have professors there. Now, in my case, when I was studying, none of any of the people had even a basic idea of what hieroglyphs actually is. So I was forced to study it myself. It took me 8 years, 8 to 9 years. Now, coming to the concept of Sanskrit, when I'm doing my course in Sanskrit from the Delhi University, I realized that I would have taken the same amount of time even for Sanskrit. Least I would not be having any professors. But since I have the teachers with me, you can go and dialogue with them. You ask your questions, they answer you. You clear your doubts. Then it takes nearly 3 to 4 years for you to master a language. That is a difference actually that I have experienced myself, implying the importance of a teacher. In today's time, you see a lot of online forums are coming. A lot of forums are coming in the form of apps that are required to teach a child. That I think is not correct because the Guru Shishya tradition, the tradition of a teacher and a student, is more important than the studying from an app because that actually develops your communication skills, that makes you confident in questioning. And at the same time, if you answer wrong, then you have the courage to face that failure. Now, these small things are very important for the psychological development of a child. If you teach a child using an app, he would be impatient because then he can get all the lessons together at one single time. Now, as I have said, patience leads to education, knowledge. Now, patience, if it doesn't exist, then how can you agree a child to be very knowledgeable and at the same time very creative? That actually happens by the Guru Shishya tradition that was prevalent in ancient India. And even today, many of the people propose that the education system of our country today needs to go back into the ashram system, where the teacher and student relation is emphasized upon. And if you want to teach the student about nature, about the universe, you need to make them study amongst the trees and the bushes and the wild animals that are there. That was the fundamental base. If you want to study nature, don't make a piece of nature available in the laboratory to test. Nature is not for testing. Human, as humans, we are also part of the natural cycle. We are part of that food chain. We are part of that nature. So if we want to understand that nature or prakriti, we need to go into the forest. We learn about that. Even Newton discovered gravity when he was in his garden, sitting
True,
under,
true.
and then an apple fell from the tree on his head and he discovered gravity. So even he had the inspiration from nature itself. Galileo had the inspiration of a pendulum after he saw that in the church, the chandeliers that you have, it was swinging, and he used his pulse to calculate the time duration one single, that swing was taking. And then he discovered the principle of pendulum, a simple pendulum. Uh, I'm going to give an example of Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin is credited with discovering the laws of evolution. Even he went on the Beagle, the ship under the British Navy. He explored all over the world. And then when he came back, he came up with ideas of evolution. That was also from nature itself. The best of the inspirations that the greatest minds have taken for the development of the world, for the advancement, has always been from nature. That we need to understand that the same principle was also emphasized by the Gurukul ashram system, which today we are lacking by, in some way or the other, as I speak, imprisoning students in cages, so to called classrooms. That shouldn't
Yeah,
be happening. And the British are actually on the credit of doing this, because if you want to make any country a slave, a colony, and if you have a country like India, a brilliant country, which has produced one of the greatest minds and achievements in all branches in world history, if you have a country like India to colonize, the first thing you do is to target the education system. Because unless and until you don't target and damage or destroy, very good. If you destroy, then it's more than enough. The education system that is giving minds like Aryabhat, Brahmagupta, some Shushrut, Charak, and brilliant minds like Rishi Kanad, who gave the first postulates of the atomic theory in his Vaisheshik school. If you don't damage that education system, you cannot make people slave in that country. And that's what the British did when under Lord Macaulay, a commission was set up for the promulgation of Western education in India. And that came with the establishment of universities. Indian system of education was backlashed into the background. It was said that agar aapko sarkari naukri karna hai, you need to understand English. So then English became a distinguishment as a class rather than as a language. It became a class. And to my dismay, it's still regarded as a class. If you are very good in Hindi, but you have nothing in English, then you are considered an illiterate. Even despite the fact that Hindi is a much scientific language than English because it is derived from Sanskrit. So it is a very great tragedy for us that even 70 years after our independence, we are still following what was promised to us by the colonial rulers. That I think we need to change. We need to go back into the ideas of Sir Rabindranath Tagore on how to culminate the education systems, the best of the East and the West. You don't throw away Western science, you don't throw away Eastern science, you make the best of both. And Ishan, remember, Sangam is more a sacred place than the rivers that make the Sangam. Now, I'm speaking from Prayag, and you know that Prayag is famous for the Triveni Sangam. That is the place where the Ganga and the Yamuna and the Saraswati, they confluence. And that is the place that is the most sacred for any person, even despite the fact whether it's a Hindu or a Muslim, everyone knows that it's a very sacred place. If it wouldn't have been sacred even for those who are not Hindus, then people like Akbar wouldn't have made a fort near to that place. Because he was very much influenced by Hindu culture and tradition, like me. Because he was also born in a Hindu family, he was born in a Hindu household. When Humayun fled to Iran, he was going towards Iran, and Hamida Banu Begum, she delivered Akbar in Umarkot. That was a palace of a Rajput ruler. So in my case, it is in my blood from my maternal family. The case was even for Akbar. He married to Hindu princesses from Rajputan and etc. etc. So Sangam is more to be worshipped. If we make India the Sangam of the East and the West, East speaking about China, Korea, and the knowledge they have, and West speaking about Europe and Africa and other places, and India being at the conference, then I think India cannot be stopped by any force to emerge as a leading world power. Because suppose you have all the Sawa so crore people of India educated, highly educated, well versed in their own fields and own skills, then I don't think so that India has anything to be stopped from becoming a world power, the intelligential center of the world. That it was in the ancient times when we had universities like Nalanda and Takshashila, where students used to come from places even like China and Korea and Japan and from the West. And today, we are at a crossroad of choosing between what is more clear, as the Kathopanishad says, what is more priya, more nice for us, and what is shreya, that is more good for us. So I think we need to go with the shreya part rather than the priya part. We don't need to, imitate and mimicry upon what the West has. I think we need to stand upon what we had in the ancient times and what the best we can make of the historical processes.
Summarize, you have said that the Indian education system should be an inclusive system that includes, the Western culture, the Eastern culture, as well as India's traditions and, the culture of India that it is. You have mentioned also the role a guru plays in someone's life. Uh, I have my guru. He is Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, and I have my gurus in history writing, Harbans Mukhia sir, Romila Thapar, and many more. A question that I often ask myself is that why do what is the role of that they play in our life? I remember a quote that goes that one of the best way to elevate your character is to emulate worthy role models. The role models for India, as far as I think, is should be Dr. Kalam, who saw the dream of India 2020 and he worked for it. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, who made the great Constitution of India, the holiest book of our nation. Then Bhagat Singh, who was a great revolutionary. Lal Bahadur Shastri, who was a very human prime minister. I think the most human prime minister that we ever had, full of humanity. And then Mahatma Gandhi, of course, the father of our nation. Even if we can include Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, the Iron Man of India, the unifier of the India that we are in. What do you think about the role that role models play in your life or in any youth's life? What is the importance of role models?
Ishan, role models are like the spirits and the body of any person who wants to pursue any advancement in life. Krishna was a role model for Arjun. When on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, when Arjun was going to fight his own grandfather, his own cousins, his own brothers, his hands began to tremble. He was in a self doubt that whether for a kingdom should I kill all these people, my own guru, my own teacher, my own grandsire, my own cousins, my own relatives, just for the sake of a kingdom. Then Krishna came and he cleared the doubts of Arjun in the dialogue that is now enshrined in the Bhagavad Gita. That it is the dharma that you have to follow. You're not fighting for a kingdom. You're fighting for the upholdment of dharma, that is righteousness. So Krishna was a role model for Arjuna. If we talk about Chanakya, he is a role model for all of us. Because if you see the situation, the political situation that was going on at the time in the country, the foreigners were at the doorstep. of invading the inland of India. They had already, the Greeks under Alexander the Great, they had reached until Punjab, and they were planning even to come into the Gangetic Plains. It was then stopped for some time by Alexander's death in 332 BC. But then after that, when Seleucus consolidated that area, he wanted to annex even the middle Gangetic Plains of India. The ruler of the Magadhian Empire, Dhananand, he was more like an enjoyer, a dance lover, a womanizer, and a corrupt king, a corrupt leader, rather than a ruler who is doing the welfare of all his subjects. And the whole of the India was divided into several Janpadas and Mahajanpada, and the Ganraj that you have, the republic, so to speak. The political situation of India was not united. Anyone can come in and it can snatch away whatever he or she wants from the soil of India. Chanakya as a role model, despite the fact that he made his student Chandragupta Maurya as the first ruler of unified India, that is the modern empire, he didn't become a king himself. He chose to become a kingmaker. He still was reluctant to follow his vow of being a brahmacharya. He was an acharya in the Takshashila University. He was a teacher, but he was very firm, very confident. The same sukta that we said in the beginning about the importance of work and action rather than just trotting over the ideologies or the ideas. He said कि कोई भी पवित्र विचार तक रह जाता है, उसको आप ग्रंथ में भी अगर उपस्थित कर दीजिए तब भी वो एक पवित्र विचार ही रह जाता है. उस पे कार्य करना, उसके ऊपर कर्म करके ही उसको एक सिद्धांत से एक कार्य के रूप में हम ला सकते हैं, सामाजिक परिवर्तन ला सकते हैं. That was his words in the Chanakya Niti. So he is a role model for all of us. He was instrumental in founding the United India, as we say. It was the first time under him India got united under the Mauryan Empire that ruled places like Afghanistan and even Transiona to places as east as in Bangladesh and then even to the south up to the fringes of Tamilakam, that is Tamil Nadu and Kerala. So he is a role model for us. Einstein is a role model for many people. Newton was a role model for Einstein himself, and Einstein is a role model for any physicist today, for any student of science. So role models have a very important role, and even in my life, there has not been a single role model, but many. I may say millions and trillions of role models. I may get inspiration from Chanakya about what an ideal state should be by studying the Arthashastra. Now, some of the points are very discriminatory, but you take the best now. Why you're criticizing the whole text on the pretext of some of the points that was okay for the society at the time, but not for us, like discrimination, caste system, that was very much prevalent during that time. But now it's something like a paradoxical thinking that way about the caste. But you take the best of all. You take the best from the Ramayana, you take the best from the Quran, you take the best from everywhere. You take the best from all the places, all the countries. That again, the thing of being a Sangam comes in. And role models, I think, play a very important role in any of the lives and in any of the changes that happen for a country, for a society, for a people.
Quickly asking you this question that you mentioned the Arthashastra and what it mentions about an ideal state. Do we get any leadership lessons from Arthashastra? Like, for me, the definition of leader would be somebody who is fearless. Yeah, a leader is somebody who have a vision for the nation and who the importance of simplicity. A leader should be simple that he can connect with the people. Then a leader must have the ability to keep learning. He must not be egoistic that I know everything. He must never stop learning. So, what lessons do we get from Arthashastra from your point of view?
Well, I may take you to China because there's a very popular Chinese proverb which says that the king is like a boat and the people are like the waters. The people can both support the king, that is the boat, and at the same time it can even submerge the boat, that is to say the
Yeah.
king.
Yeah.
It can revert. The Arthashastra totally agrees with such ideas. In the Arthashastra, you see that not an absolute power has been given to the king. There are huge chapters on the maintenance of a council of ministers, that is Matya, Amatya, and the king is obliged to listen to the advice and the suggestions of each and every official who works. He needs to pay heed to the advice of the council of ministers. He cannot act independently. Now, in the ancient times, for an ancient king, especially in India, the king was not an all-knower person. Chanakya was very much intelligent in making sure that the king doesn't know everything and anything about the kingdom. There should be some points where only the ministers have a role to play. So there are places like the post of a Raj Purohit, that without the Purohit you cannot do any sacrifice such as the Ashwamedh or the other sacrifices that the kings used to perform. It was the work of the Raj Purohit, that is the court priest. It was the work of the ministers related to the commerce and the economic section to make sure that the commerce and the economic transactions and the developments of the empire are doing well enough for the people to follow. And it is required in the Arthashastra that any person who is to be designated as the Minister of Finance or Minister of Crafts, Minister of Factories, something related to workmanship, he needs to have all the knowledge of the Arthashastra and whatever other books have been written on the economic and the commercial activities that were prevalent in ancient India. So the Arthashastra requires a huge amount of study that has to be done both by the king as well as the ministers. Now, in the Arthashastra, for an ideal king, you have a huge list of the daily activities that a king has to perform. So, the sort of a daily routine of a king. So, it speaks about the king rising up early at the strings of the music. And the Arthashastra has divided the whole time of 24 hours into several areas and sections, under which the king has to do different activities, like even watering the cows and milking the cows, worshipping the cows. It also emphasizes upon some hours of the day that a king should dedicate to study alone. So that is very important, that the Arthashastra wants a king to be educated. Similarly to the emphasis Plato has on the importance of an educated ruler. Now, in his book, The Republic, it's a classic in Greek philosophy. You have an entire book in the Republic dedicated to the education of a ruler. That a ruler should be educated in not only the state craftsmen and aristocracy and administration, he should also have a well versed knowledge in rhetoric, that is, oratory, making speeches. He should be well versed in mathematics so that nobody can cheat him on the cases of the economic and the commercial levels that are coming up in the country. So he should be much intelligent and at the same time very much clever in making sure that none of the ministers is cheating upon him. He should be well versed in the Dharma Shastra. Now, a question even comes in India that when Samudragupta, the Guptan ruler, was declared as the heir on the throne by Chandragupta I, his father, many of the people in the court, they were mesmering and mus was going on in the court at the time, that marrying to a Lichavi princess was okay for Chandragupta I, the Guptan ruler. But making a son who is a product of that union the next king is different, because there was an idea going on in the court that the Lichavis were actually an oligarchic form. They had an oligarchic form of government where there were certain people. It was a group of people who would decide upon the matters of the state. It was not an absolute monarchy like the Guptans had. So many of the people were fearing that if Samudragupta comes on the throne, he may switch to the change of the government setup, common to his maternal home, that is the Lichavis. But then Hari Sen's father, Hari Sen, the ruler, the poet who wrote the Prayag Prashasti, who was a court poet for Samudragupta, his father, who was also an official in the court, he maintained to all the ministers that no, Samudragupta is well versed with the Dharma Shastra, he is well versed with the Puran, he is well versed with all the Shastras. So here also you have a historical source referring on the importance of the knowledge of the Shastra or the text as a whole that any ruler has to have for maintaining or administering the country. So these instances have very much good implications on how and why a ruler should be educated.
Learn from our ancient texts, and we have to revise it and adopt accordingly to the situation, that what fits to the situation in the present. Not blindly everything that is written in the texts. We have to uh, think about it, what to take and what we have to leave. So coming to our last question, that is, I think, most interesting question of all, that what is your vision for India 2030? And let me just put on this record that I was interviewing two wonderful people, and I'll just mention their answer to this question. One is Padma Shri Arvind Gupta ji. His answer to this question was: all children of India, irrespective of caste, class, religion, should go to school and get a good, meaningful education. Basic health services should be made available to all. We should develop progress, but also take care of the environment, that is about the climate change that has been going on. We must respect all minorities. The constitution provides all citizens equal rights, and we should respect that. By 2030 we should have employment under employment schemes. We should plant trees away from nuclear plants to wind and solar energy. So I think that was a very fantastic aim for a innovator like Arvind Gupta ji. Whereas Bharat Ratna K.N.R. Rao sir told me that the time is running out. He warned us all, the youth, that time is running out, and by 2030 we have to completely restructure our education system and improve the infrastructure in a manner that India comes to the top of the world. The Vishwa Guru. So this is his hope and prayer. What is your vision, Arsh?
Ishan, you have stated correctly that some of the points from the past needs to be rejected. Some of it has to be accepted to meet the requirements and the needs of today's society. No, actually, India as a country has the largest population of youth who are under the age of 21. I may say that India 2030, if we speak about, has lot of chances and possibilities of becoming a world power.
Hmm.
Now, India and her ancient tradition has never emphasized upon conquering others' lands or making the political pressure on other countries for its own benefit. India has always talked about Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the Maha Upanishad, and the verse that it says, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which means the world is one family, is really a beautiful metaphor. In a family, you don't pressurize other members of the family for making sure that they oblige to you, they follow you. You don't do things like that. You hear, you discuss, you love each other, you respect one another. That is what a family means, and India has always been following this particular tradition. Now, coming to the question of 2030, I think that 2030 should be a time when none of the caste and the class and the creeds that we have in the country needs to be adhered to by the youth. There should be no identification on the basis of whether you are a Brahmin or a Kshatriya or a Vaishya or a Shudra or whatever, SPSC, OBC, general. We shouldn't have that system. Now, in the time of independence, if you see the demographies, the social status and the economic status of, so to speak, the oppressed classes was very, very horrible. So reservation was required at the time. Now, I think that by 2030, we would already be having an equal status quo between, so to speak, the general caste or the OBC, ST, whatever we say in the reservation categories. So, such systems actually makes one more identified with his caste or creed. That is very much prevalent in society today. People are again started to speak about their caste and their gotra and things like that. That shouldn't be the case today. We are in the 21st century. We're not talking about making homes in moon and making colonies on Mars. We cannot hope to still rely on these old traditions. I may be very much reluctant and at the same time very much agreeing on the fact to criticize the system. It is not even from the Vedas that people say that caste system has been formed from the heavens. No. People who refer to the Purush Sukta of the Rig Veda, where it says that the Vishal Purush was sacrificed by the gods, and out of the four parts, the four castes came into origination. So the Brahmins came from the mouth, the Kshatriyas came from the arms, the Vaishyas came from the thighs, and the Shudra came from the legs, from the feet. Now that very much that same Purush, it continues. That Shudra to wo hai jiske charam Purush ke. So the very concept of Varna actually, Ishan, refers to color. When we speak about the alphabets, we talk of it as the Varnamala. That is
Yes.
a rosary or a necklace of beautiful colored beads tied it together in a definite order. So Varn means color. Now Shudra actually refers to the dark complexion, and that refers to the earth. So actually the Purush Sukta wanted to emphasize that the earth was formed from the legs of Purush, that Virat Purush, the cosmological man, the primordial man that was created by the gods. So even the Vedas don't agree with the caste system, especially the Rig Veda. Even you have an instance in the Rig Veda where it says that I am a poet, my father is a physician, and my mother is a grinder of corn. So here also you see that class distinctions weren't anything in the early Rig Vedic period. It was only with the advent of the later Vedic age when the caste system became very much rigid, and by the time of the Guptas, it became much more rigid, and introduction of Gotra system and things like that began to appear. So we say that even the Shastra doesn't consider caste system. The earliest of the Shastra, that is the Rig Veda. So if the Shastras don't agree, who are we to talk about anything related to caste? There shouldn't be anything like that. There's nothing like that. We all are, in the out of Africa theory. We all have came from Africa. We all, the ancestors of modern day humans, have came all the way from the African continent in the Lake Turkana region, that the East African region of Africa. We have came from there. So we have a common father, we have a common mother. So that is what 2030 should be, a scientific temper of solving problems. Every youth should be an entrepreneur. If I am good in history, that doesn't mean that I am also good in sciences. Then there's nothing different between me and a deva. I have to have some loopholes. Nobody is perfect. But yes, everyone strives to attain perfection. So it is very important that that spirit should come from us to attain perfection in all our undertakings, even if we know that perfection is never possible to be achieved by any human person. So that spirit should be there. If I'm good in something, I should make the best of what I have for my society, the world in which I live, the country from which I belong. If you are good in sciences, you should be the best of that person to have the best of knowledge of a particular field, and making sure that you think creatively innovatively to solve problems that our country, our society, and the world is facing. You see, a very good example I can give you: the coronavirus has come in the play. Now there was this race that was happening. Okay, science student, okay, go. You have good package. So people were talking about package and about money and about salary that they get. They weren't talking about how you make the best use of your knowledge, how
Yeah.
you uplift society, how you solve problems. Now you see Corona has come, and now the laboratories are being cleaned and furnished, and people are pouring money into the laboratories. So people are understanding that Saraswati, knowledge is even more important than Lakshmi, that is wealth. It is more important than that. And we need to understand that 2030 should be all about knowledge, innovation, entrepreneurship, and also the rightful use of that power. India as a country needs to uplift its youth by new ways of solving problems. We cannot rely on 18th century, 19th century old principles to run and solve the issues of the 21st century. We need to come up with the third millennium answers to the third millennium questions. We need to come up with new ways. We need to form a world parliament where everyone should be speaking about the principle of equality amongst all people. If we are speaking about Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, that is, the world is one family, we need to make an association where all the members of the world, all the countries of the world have an equal stance. And that is important for solving the problems that the world is facing, because you have the bombs already with you. You're already having the weapons of destruction. The only thing you need to do is to launch them, and the world flashes over. So the danger is coming very imminent. We need to find ways of solving them. Now, coming to the problem of agriculture that we are facing, we are still using the technology that the Green Revolution Phase 1 had given us back in 1950s and 60s. We cannot again solve the problems of the 21st century like global warming and the greenhouse effect, as well as the effects of those natural catastrophes on the agriculture today using the technologies of 1950s and 60s. We need to come up with new ways. So that, I think, in my own view, is all about 2030 India, and also keeping in view that 2030 India is not isolated from 2030 world. We are in an age of globalization. If we are talking about India, we need to inculcate the world also in our perspective. That will actually widen our brain rather than
Yes.
making us isolated from the entire world. We cannot create a boundary or a wall around the entire country to isolate other people from us, other cultures
Yes.
from us. It is impossible. Interactions have to happen. Innovations need to be made by collaborations with several countries. The situation, the I may say, the diplomatic relationships between India and the neighboring countries needs to be very much restored back as what it was back in 1947. Leaving aside, places like Pakistan where the situation was very bad even in 1947, but that also should be restored. We should have coordinate relationships. In terms of science, in terms of heritage, we have a common heritage. We have to have collaborative archaeological and literary and scientific collaborations and campaigns between these countries to maintain that the development of in all the spheres remain the same. It shouldn't be like India, the progress is going very fast, but in Pakistan or in Sri Lanka or in Nepal or in Bangladesh, the progress is slowing down. We shouldn't make it happen this way. This is not nationalism. Nationalism is all about being proud of your country, being very much proud about your culture, your heritage, your history, following the best of your history, knowing the best of your history, and at the same time using the sacred principles and ideas of our faith, our religious texts, our philosophies for the betterment of all. This is what the Bhagavad Gita says, that karma should always be for the maintenance of dharma, and dharma cannot be stored in a vessel. It has to spread to other places. The effect of anything good will also spread, and the effect of anything bad will also spread. We need to work for the good. That is, and that should be what 2030 India and the world should be all about. The youth, as we, would be about 30 and 35 years of age by then. We have to look how we need to see the world in the future. What face will we show to our children that this is what a mess we made of our world?
Yeah.
We are responsible for that. We have an answer. We are answerable to the next generation. We have to think that way. We aren't like idle people that something might be happening to you and that is nothing to do with me. This is stubbornness and this I think is greed. This is what the Shastra says, Kalyug. We should think of that way to make world a beautiful place again. And that is only possible with education, with innovation, and with new ways of thinking about problems and solutions. There's no friend, no enemy. That is specifically against the principles of our faith, our country. The Vedas speak against this, the Bhagavad Gita speaks against this, all the texts speak against greed and being angerous and being, making friends and foes. Indian tradition strictly disobeys this thing. It says all of us are friends. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. This, I think, should be the, I may say, the height in the movement of India and the world 2030.
That's very creative and very, very, what you say, a very aspiring dream that we see. We must, work upon it. Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam's last lecture that he gave at IIM Shillong was creating a livable planet. When he, fell down and he passed away, unfortunately. So he was working towards that dream that we all have forgotten by now. We do not remember the 10 points that he laid down for us. You know, in India 2030, of my vision is what you see, the diminishing of the urban and rural divide and creating a bridge between inequalities and gender discriminations and caste based or any kind of discrimination in the nation, inclusivity of everybody, a role of youth in the policy making process, even in the politics of our nation at the national level. You should be encouraged to take part in politics. Okay, not the dirty politics of vote bank, obviously, but for the politics of development. Then I think education is affordable to everybody, quality education and quality healthcare. These two things are very necessary for a society. This should be available to everybody and it should be affordable for everyone. And I think this is something that we all have to do. It is our role as a youngster in this nation, and not just in India but in the world. In the top, for the, as far as the climate change is concerned, we also have to play a major role in that as well. We have to save our culture, we have to save our climate, we have to save our society to make a better world, better India, to make a better future for all of us. With that, I think the death anniversary of Dr. Kalam is coming on 27th of July. Whoever is watching us, who will watch us later on, I request you all to at least, go and read about Kalam's vision of India 2020. This is India 2020, and I think this death anniversary is very special to everybody, because he was the one who gave us that dream. We should all remember what he said. We should all make a goal in our life to fulfill at least 50% of that goal by 2030, and we will become a great nation without any doubt. So, with this, I thank Arsh for being my guest this evening. Thank you very much, everyone who watched us live or who are going to watch this on YouTube. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ishan. And it's always a great pleasure being a part of your initiatives about thinking about India and the world at large. And I think that a lot of people that have passed away from the Indian soil, be it Mahatma Gandhi or be it Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, we all need to remember the philosophies and the ideologies of those great personalities. If Mahatma Gandhi has told us to be a people or a country manufacturing our stuff for ourselves and also exporting the surplus to other countries, that is to be self-reliant. That is very important. So in the age of globalization, you can be a self-reliant country as well as a globalized country. And 2030 should be both about adding more of the Indian influence into globalization and at the same time making sure that the handicraft industries, the industries that we have in the villages, the industry that support the lives of
Rural
millions
economy. Yeah.
and living under poverty, we need to make sure that we don't need to be the United States or the UK. We need to be India. We need to be supporting our own people. And I think that is the best way of showcasing one's own nationalism. That is, so to speak, supporting the people of our country for the benefit of us with the Indians for the whole world to go. That I think should be the height in the spirits of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, India, and the world 2030. The movement of the Khadi that happened in the independence movement, that is an inspiration for us. Why are we wearing the in Western clothes? Because we want to be Western people, but we aren't. Now, I just saw your post just 2 3 hours before that only 2 to 3% of the people speak English in India properly, like Mr. Shashi Tharoor. Rest of the people they make a fuss and a total mess of the English language. That is true because they don't know English properly, but they still want to be Angrez. So we have tired ourselves of getting rid of these Angrezi people from our country 70 years ago, and now we are trying to be white people ourselves. This is not going to happen. And I think that adopting the traditional Indian attire is a way of showcasing your love towards your country and your people. It is not like you're back minded or you are, living in the 19th and the 18th centuries. No. If your mind is solving problems of the 21st century, I think nobody is more modern than you. If you are thinking about modern problems in a modern way, and that is to showcase the togetherness and the unity of the Indian people together, to make sure that none of the hungry remains hungry in our country. Now, there's a very common dialogue that happened between Chanakya and Chandragupta. Chandragupta wanted to enjoy his life as a ruler, and Chanakya said, "Moorkh, तू सुखी रहना चाहता है जब तक तेरे राज्य में एक भी व्यक्ति भूखा है, जब भी तेरे राज्य में एक भी व्यक्ति गरीब है, तुझे सुख से रहने का कोई भी अधिकार नहीं." This particular idea should be enshrined in the minds of each and every Indian, the youth, and that will, I'm very much sure, make us India and the world 2030.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ash. That was a great ending comment, and thank you very much everyone who joined us live and who are going to
And
watch this video.